Okay, since very few people are here, we may as well start. I got no problems. So we have the discussion questions up there, and let's get going. And then if people come in, they join us. If not, they're out there enjoying the sunshine. Last week we started with this many, ended up with 70. Yeah. So, or 2 weeks ago. So. Oh yeah, that could be it. Is it? So today's topic is how to run a red light and get away with it. All of those who have driver's license are glad you came. So as you saw in the questions, is this a bit loud? It sounds a bit loud to me, yeah. John, if you want to turn it down. Yeah. What? So as you saw in the questions, you're going to run into a lot of different challenges out there, and so we'll go over some of them. One of them is that my remote doesn't seem to be working suddenly. What happened? It was working a second ago. Okay, hang on. Yeah, it was. No, it got flipped out. Okay. Where is it? That's weird. Hang on. Kicked out of the presentation mode. There it is. Okay. So some of the common statements you're going to run into is there is no objective truth. So many people disagree about morality that there can't be an absolute morality or an objective morality. And then, of course, morality is what we make of it. Everyone has their own morality. You're going to run into that awful lot, especially amongst atheists. And then the Christian challenges, who are you to judge others? The Bible says, judge not. But the one that I see it in is, well, you shouldn't judge other cultures. Right? They'll say, different cultures have different standards, and it's not ours to judge those standards. I always like this one. It's wrong to think you have all the right answers. And, of course, Christians are intolerant of other people's ideas and beliefs. And Christians are closed-minded and have blind faith. Now, I'm not going to cover all of these today. Some of these we'll cover later on in the next few weeks. Then it's wrong to force your morality on others. You can't legislate morality, meaning you can't pass laws based on values. And one of my favorites, laws don't change hearts. I hear that all the time. Anytime I get into a discussion with someone about politics, they're like, well, Neil, laws don't change hearts. So you will hear these statements made by professors, by characters in movies, by reporters in the newspaper, by news anchors. Your teachers will say these things. Your friends may say these things. Even your family might say these things. And you may have a tendency to accept them blindly. So I'm not going to give you all the responses to these questions right away, because I want you to lead you through the logic behind the answers. And I want you to arrive at it gradually. Now, I do think it's critical that we are able to respond to these questions logically and rationally. Why? Because we serve a logical and rational God, right? And we believe that rationality and logic are part of the very nature of the mighty God we serve. Okay. So I'm going to start because of the questions kind of might have confused you, right? So I'm going to start by making a very clear claim. I think there is an absolute or objective morality, and there are objective moral values. Now you might say, well, how can you say that though? Because we just showed you a bunch of just statements. I mean, after all, don't different cultures have different moral values? Isn't it all relative? For instance, in some tribes, they think it's important to be friendly to visitors. In other tribes, they think it's important to attack or shun visitors. We also run into situational ethics, like the midwives in the Old Testament, right? So the midwives were told by Pharaoh, the authority, to kill every single male Hebrew. And yet they lied to him and said, well, now I remember, they were Hebrew midwives, right? They said, well, these Hebrew slaves are so healthy that by the time we get there, the babies are already born. So is it okay for Hebrew women to lie to Pharaoh? I have in my notes Jewish women. It wasn't Jewish women, it was Hebrew women, right? Because there was the Jews and the Israelites and the Levites and all that, right? And remember, the Jews are just the tribe of Judah. So my notes are wrong. But is it okay for the Hebrew women to lie to Pharaoh when a Jewish boy is born? What do you think? Some people say yes, some people aren't sure. Is it okay for a Nazi, a spy who's spying on the Nazis, to lie and pretend that he's a Nazi too? Yes, but he's lying, right? But in that case, people say, doesn't morality depend on the situation? They call it situation ethics. And if that's the case, how can I say there's an objective right and objective wrong, or absolute right and absolute wrong? Right? How about here in America? Is homosexuality or same-sex marriage an objective right or an objective wrong, or it's a cultural value? Right? How about, is having abortion a cultural issue or an objective moral value? And then, of course, the recent transgenderism. Is transgenderism a cultural value or an objective moral value? Is allowing biological men who claim to be women to use the young girls' locker rooms an objective moral issue, or is it just a cultural issue? So before we answer those, we should ask this question. What is the consequences? What are the consequences if there is no objective morality? What do you guys think? Chaos, right? Everybody just quickly chaos, right? Well, immediately, and the immediate consequence is that there's no right, no wrong. It becomes one of those of what is right for you may not be right for me, and what is wrong for you is not wrong for me. And who am I to judge? And this actually ends up being very appealing to modern day society because it's tolerant, right? But there are some real consequences of this tolerance and real consequence of the absence of objective morality. Let me give you an example. The philosopher, this is not a new discussion, this is an ancient discussion. The philosopher Frederick Copleston was debating with the atheist Bertrand and Russel. And in the debate, Copleston turned to Mr. Russel and said, Mr. Russel, you do believe in good and bad, don't you? And Russel answered, yes, I do. Well, how do you differentiate between them, challenged Copleston. Russel shrugged his shoulders and said, well, the same way I differentiate between yellow and blue. Copleston graciously responded, well, Mr. Russel, you differentiate between yellow and blue by seeing, don't you? How do you differentiate between good and bad? And Russel said, on the basis of feeling. What else? Now, Copleston was a bit too kind on that day, but what he should have done, he should have said, well, Mr. Russel, in some cultures, they feel they should love their neighbors. In other cultures, they feel they should eat their neighbors. What is your preference? Right? Because immediately when you start bringing it down to that, you realize, 1A, the culture does not have a lock on morality, and 2, feelings are not a good basis for morality. The minute you take away the absolutes from the equation and make the issue arbitrary, you end up with the question of who decides what is wrong and what is right. Remember this, we did this a couple of weeks ago. If there is no objective morality, is there a difference between Mother Teresa and Hitler? You know? The fundamental objective is that you have no basis to judge Hitler. You need a standard to judge Hitler on. And as I say, if there is no objective morality, the fundamental problem with not having objective morality is that you have no basis to judge Hitler. And I said, if there is no objective morality, why was Hitler wrong? And then, of course, somebody will say, well, there is no objective morality, to which the Christian will be challenged. This is the challenge to us Christians. If there is no objective morality, why do you get to decide what it is and not Hitler? So, if you have no basis to judge Hitler, then everything starts to fall apart. Now, some people will respond to this by saying, well, I think it was wrong for Hitler to do what he did, but who am I to judge Hitler? And the minute you hear that, you should look disgusted, because it is disgusting. And the way you respond to that is you find a Jewish friend and say, this man thinks it wasn't wrong for Hitler to kill the Jews. He just disagrees with it. But when you ask an atheist who does think, he will come up with an answer. And one of the answers that I've come up with talking to my atheist friends is, so if I, and they say, well, there is no objective morality, so we base our morality on what is best for your society. Well, here's the problem with that. Do you see the problem with this? Do you see a problem with this? It should come to you immediately. Well, what is the problem? Well, the problem is the Nazis did what they thought was best for their society. Right? So does that justify killing the Jews? Now, he couldn't say, you see, we have to do what's best for your family because then it's too small. So he tried to enlarge it to make it what's good for society, but then you still run into the problem. So then they answer with, okay. They fall back on this. I realize that society is the wrong word. I got to use a bigger group of people. So then they come up with a second possible answer. There is no objective morality, so we base our morality on what is best for all mankind. Now, there is still a problem with this. Do you see it? Do you know what the problem is with this statement? There's a huge problem with this statement. The first problem with this statement is what? Who decides what is best for mankind? And two, who is mankind? Right? Is mankind? Hitler decided that what? Jews were not human. So immediately you can see that this is not a good answer at all. I mean, after all, you could argue maybe what Hitler did was best for mankind. Because while he was killing the Jews, he was also killing a whole bunch of people who were deformed or weak or homosexual or sick or mentally retarded. He was killing all of them too. And he thought he was doing a benefit for society. They called it life not worth living. And so they thought that just like the wolves culled the sixth deer from the herd, and that ensures that the deer will always be healthy, and any deer with bad genes will never get to pass it on to another. The wolves are doing the herd a favor, right? So they thought Hitler decided that if he could clean up the bad genes in society because he followed Darwin, then he would actually be doing humanity a favor. But you realize that that doesn't work either. So then, of course, we get to this. Good and bad is decided by a majority vote. And I get this a lot, especially from people who don't agree with my conservative views, right? They say, well, good and bad should be decided by a majority vote. This is a democratic system. Now, do you see a problem with that? We've talked about this briefly in the back. What's the problem with the majority vote? It's not always right. In fact, can you think of an example when the majority vote was wrong? Okay, besides that. But think of something else, right? Can you think of something that every single society in the world thought was okay? Slavery. Is that what you're going to say? Slavery. Why? See, every single society thought slavery was okay as long as they were not the slaves. Now, there is an exception to that rule, though, by the way, because the Israelites were banned from having slaves. And we'll talk about slavery in the Bible in this class at some point. So, if everybody thought slavery was okay, it wasn't until the 1800s that a majority thought it was, but until the 1800s, a majority of people thought it wasn't wrong. But here's the question. Was slavery really bad? Before a majority of the people realized slavery was bad, was it bad? Of course it was bad. It wasn't like, oh, slavery was okay, and then when everybody decided to vote against slavery, it suddenly became bad, right? Slavery was always bad. It was always a problem. But it wasn't until the 1800s when Christians convinced most of the world that it was wrong, most people thought it was okay. Now, this is actually a very powerful argument. Now, I have had some atheists try to get out of this argument saying, well, slavery, I think slavery is wrong, but it's not my place to judge those people. To which I always introduce him to one of my black friends, like Kevin McGarry, who's my co-founder of one of my organizations. And I say, yeah, why don't you explain that to him? Kevin is my size, a lot heavier than me and knows a lot of the martial arts. You tell him that slavery was okay. Right? So then you end up with this. Okay, maybe objective and absolute moral values don't exist. And then we're back to Hitler again, right? Do they exist or not? So how do we convince people that objective moral values exist? So I want to give you one objective moral value that works, right? So to prove that objective moral values do exist, I just need to show you one objective moral value. Just one. Because if there's one that exists, then we know more can exist, right? So, and even if there are no other objective moral values, at least there's one, right? And remember in the past talk we said if there is at least one more, if there is an objective moral value, then there has to be an objective moral value giver, right? And we talked about that. But okay, so can you think of one objective moral value that every society and sane person believes in, even the Nazis? Unless they're crazy, right? And we recognize that only crazy people would not agree with this objective moral value. Can you think of it? It's a compound moral value. Life for ourselves, but that's for yourself. So here's one, and when you see it, my daughter's answering. Yes. No, it's because some people might say, I don't need to be fair to you, right? So here it is, and when I say it, you guys will go, oh, here it is. Torturing human babies for fun is wrong. Now, it's a compound one, right? For fun is very important. If you just say torturing human babies is wrong, somebody will say, well, what about if you're talking to a terrorist and you have his baby and he has a nuclear bomb in New York, and if you torture his baby, he'll tell you where the bomb is, right? Okay, so we get rid of that aspect by putting it for fun, right? There is nobody on this planet who thinks torturing human babies for fun is right, unless they're crazy. And we immediately recognize that they are crazy. So I have one. So objective moral values do exist, don't they? Now, before we go into why there's an objective morality and what it is and how we can prove it exists, let's understand why people abandon the idea of objective morality. Why do they abandon it? Well, there are 4 reasons I've come up with. In all my arguments with people, I've come up with 4 reasons why people abandon this objective moral value principle. One is they want to be loving and understanding. See, most of the time when I talk to people who don't think there's objective moral value, it's because they can think of these values that they want, that their friends have or they have, that they don't want to be wrong, right? I want to be loving to my transgender friend. I want to be loving to my gay friend. I want to be loving to my friend who had an abortion. I want to be loving to my friend who had a divorce. They want to come alongside their friends. So they want to be loving and understanding, right? So I think we need to reach out to these folks, not by attacking them because we'll just create an enemy, but coming alongside them and helping them think logically through this. It's because they want to show compassion that they come to this point, right? And so we want to deal with them in a proper way. Now, most of the time, you can deal with these people by walking through what they say is right and explaining why it's wrong. Let's say they pick abortion, right? And I do a talk where I prove that abortion is actually killing a human child. There's no way it isn't, and I show all the scientific evidence for it. Now, you can walk them through that in a gentle way, and they'll say, okay. And now they'll still be reluctant because they're, maybe they've had an abortion or they've had and the idea is, look, I'm not condemning you. I'm just telling this is information you need to understand and start processing. So you can start going through some of that, right? So that's the first reason. The second reason I've seen is that they really want to do those things that God seems to say is wrong, right? They really want to sleep with their boyfriend. They really want to, go down this line. And so they're always going to try to justify that because that's inside them. They really want to do that. And again, the reason why the solution to that is not to attack them, but to explain why it's unhealthy. Let me explain you statistics. Most people who live with a boyfriend or a girlfriend before they get married have a higher chance of getting divorced, have a higher chance of having mental illnesses and depression, have a higher chance of not having a fulfilled marriage or a fulfilled family, right? These are statistics. Yeah, there are exceptions to the rule, but these are the statistics. And they feel that because we have these moral standards that are so high, they feel they can never achieve them. But the reality is that God, why does God give us the rules? To protect us, right? And so these rules are there, and so it's our job to try and explain these rules. By the way, I explain a whole bunch of these rules in the book, Jesus is Involved in Politics. I go through it and I explain, this is why this law is there, this is why this law is there, and I give you statistics and reasons behind as a bunch of them, right? Okay. And then we get to the third reason. They've seen situations where one moral law seems to conflict with another moral law. These are why people abandon the concept of objective morality. So they see an example where two moral laws come and clash, like the midwives in Pharaoh, right? They're like, oh, see, we have two moral laws, they can't be objective. Or you're hiding Jews under Nazi Germany. Nazis come to your door. Do you have Jews? Do you lie? Do you tell the truth? How do you make that decision? And so this is what we want to do. So I'm going to show you how this law, and I'm going to show you how this is not situational ethics. It's very important to understand what I'm about to show you is not situational ethics because it's not something that changes with each situation. There is an objective moral law. I'm going to show you how to walk through it. And I heard you telling your group this answer, so they already know this because I heard you actually hit it right on the head, okay? So here's how it is. First of all, let's start with, is it okay to run a red light? It's called the hierarchy of laws. Is it okay to run a red light? No, it's not okay to run a red light. So the first rule is don't run a red light. Now, half of you are thinking, but wait, there are times when I can run a red light, right? How many people thought that? Wait, there is an exception to the rule, right? Now, there is a time. So when can you run a red light? When the light's not working. Okay, I wasn't thinking of that one, but yeah. But there's another time when you can run a red light. When you're an ambulance driver, or what if somebody in your car is dying? Can you run a red light if someone's in your car? So the second rule, which is higher than the first rule, is do what it takes to save a person who is dying. Because life is always the highest principle. Okay. Now, so you don't run a red light. Second, do what it takes to save a person who's dying. And you can rephrase this any way you wish. So hopefully you will agree that it's silly to abandon all traffic laws just because there's a hierarchy of laws here, right? You're thinking, okay, and just because there was a higher law that superseded it doesn't mean that there is no law. Does the don't run a red light still apply in most cases? Yes. Do we say, oh, we should not have any traffic laws because of that? Do we say there is no objective traffic law ever? Oh, there is no objective traffic law, right? So the second thing we have to realize is just because an issue is complex, it doesn't mean that the entire principle should be abandoned. Okay? For instance, we can show that the above decision to run that red light can be complicated and require an even higher moral principle that overrides the first two. So, should we run a red light if we have a medical emergency, but will kill somebody else who is in the intersection? So you come to an intersection, you see the red light, you stop, but the person in your passenger seat is dying, but there's somebody in the crosswalk. Can you run him over while you take your friend to the hospital? No. So this actually complicates things. So don't kill anyone, right? So in simple terms, don't run a red light. Do what it takes to save a person who's dying. 3, don't kill anyone in the process of saving someone. And again, we don't see any sane people clamoring to abandon traffic laws. But there is another exception to this rule, isn't there? Let's say there's a man standing in the sidewalk with a gun and he's just shot your friend in the passenger seat. Can you run him over? Yes, of course. It's okay to kill someone in self-defense or defense of others by hitting them in the car. Then you make sure you don't kill any innocent bystanders, and then you run the red light while you take a person to the hospital. So as you can see, this is not situational ethics. There's a hierarchy of laws very clearly defined, and the highest law is life. And no one abandons the law of gravity just because we know there are complicated exceptions to it, like the law of aerodynamics, right? So we don't abandon these laws. And that's what the Wright brothers did when they figured out how to fly a plane, right? Now you go, wait a minute, you just compared the laws of gravity to the moral laws of God. Yeah. And they're very similar, because some people say, well, how come we didn't figure out that slavery was wrong? I said, well, the Bible always figured it out. But he says, well, how come society didn't figure out that slavery was wrong? I said, the same reason why how society figured out the law of gravity. We didn't understand the laws of gravity until Newton came along. And the same way society can discover moral laws in the same physical nature, that doesn't mean that they're arbitrary. Now, the Bible tends to tell us all of the moral laws. But there are some details that are complications, like, you know, if a policeman pulls you over, does he get to look at your phone? No. Well, they didn't have phones when they designed the laws that policemen have. You have a right to privacy, right? Well, of course. He just extends that. Okay, so coming back to why people abandon the law, point number 4 is that what? Different culture, and then so point number 4 is that why do they abandon it? The point number 4 is different cultures seem to have different moral values. There is an example that, it's kind of a funny example. There was a tribe in Africa that considered breasts not sexual. They thought ankles were very sexual. So when the missionaries went into this tribe, all the women's ankles were covered, but they weren't wearing anything on top. So the missionaries were kind of embarrassed, and they started to look down, at which the tribesmen got very angry. Why are you looking at our wives' ankles, right? So the question is, does that mean it's wrong or right? So how do we discuss, is it okay not to wear a top, right? Now, this is a cultural thing. But the right answer is quite simply, there is a standard there. The standard is what is considered sexual in that culture, and what is considered, in that culture, they understood wives and husbands as part of a distinct group. And that's a biblical value, right? So you've got to decide how you're going to interact, and you've got to keep that basic law of God, moral law of God. Now, can an entire culture be wrong, though? Can you go into another tribe and find out that they actually have bad values? Yes, a culture like the Nazis are wrong. The culture that killed and ate their neighbors is wrong, right? That's obviously very clear, right? The underlying principle is what we should understand. And in that tribe, they understood the sexual nature was to be honored. They just considered different things. Okay, here's another one. In the Middle Ages, it was okay to kill witches. Is it still okay to kill witches? This is a trick question. Yes, it's still okay to kill witches, if they really are witches. Why were they killing witches in the old days? Because they thought witches were what? Putting curses on their kids and eating their children. If you find witches who fit that definition, it's okay to kill them. The problem was those witches did not fit their definition. They were not doing that. Right? So if your definition is a witch is someone who entraps a child and kills them, yes. If your definition is, well, a witch is someone who prays to Satan, well, even back then, the only reason they were supposed to do that was because it violated what they were doing was the right? Because in America, you weren't allowed to kill someone just because they prayed to Satan. Now, can you go back to the Old Testament and do that? That's a different thing. That was a different law, a different time, and we have to look at that carefully, right? So we realize our witches do not kidnap our children and boil them alive and eat them. But if there were a group of people who kidnapped children and ate them, we would hunt them down and we would kill them. So, now you could argue that some witches still do that, but we believe strongly that you're innocent until proven guilty. So you've got to prove that. And also there are a lot of more non-witches who are just psychopaths who are just as dangerous. So our morals didn't change. What we changed was the understanding of who was actually criminal, who was doing criminal things. Okay, so here's the answer to this. If there is no objective morality, why was Hitler wrong, right? If there is an objective morality, why do you get to decide what it is and not Hitler? Now, if you were in one of the previous classes, what is the answer to this? How do we answer this question? Is there an objective morality? Yes. And who gets to decide it? God. Yes, there is an objective morality, and God decides what it is, not you and not Hitler. And yeah. Objective morality. Oops. Yeah, so these are the 4 reasons, right? Was there one that I missed? Mm-hmm. Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, that, and at the root of all that, sorry, I went past it again. At the root of all this is, of course, they have abandoned the Lord. But they don't realize that. So when you're talking to people, these are the reasons. And so in most cases, you can't jump to, because if I go to an atheist and say, well, the reason you don't believe in objective morality is because you've abandoned the Lord. Well, that's the end of that conversation. It doesn't going to go anywhere, right? So I want to lead him to this, and then when he realizes, yes, there is an objective morality, yes, I can't defend it unless I defend Hitler, and I don't want to be in the position of defending Hitler, then now I have this dialogue with him where I say, okay, so if there is, you believe in right and wrong, yes, okay, well then where does it come from? And I have this dialogue a lot on Facebook. There's a great group that I interact with called Unbelievable, and there's a lot of atheists there, and it's a great, so last week I had a friend who called me and said, hey, I have this book, how do I vet it? I said, get on there and put it out there, see how much flack and hate you get, and then you'll know the answer, right? No, I don't know, I haven't seen it yet, so. Okay, now here's the question though. Remember, we ended with this. Yes, there is an objective morality, and God decides what it is, not you and not Hitler. Now, what is the question you're going to get when you say this? How do you know there's a God? And if you're talking to a Muslim or a Buddhist, they'll say, which God? Right? The question is, okay, but who's God? Is it the Muslim God? Is it the Hindu God? And then how do you know what his morals are, right? So which God, and how do you know what his morals are? Well, the only way you could prove this would be to prove which God it is and prove what his word is, right? That's the only way to do it. For that answer, we need what? Apologetics, right? And that's the crux of this. And remember, if you've not watched the beginning of this, we don't use this to prove God exists. First prove God exists, and then we come to this conclusion. Because if you don't start with God, then all this stuff is just, okay, well, I guess we're stuck. There is no objective morality. Hitler may have been right or wrong. Who knows, right? And so for those of you, I know in this class you have, but if you're watching this, what is apologetics? Apologetics is the evidence and defense of the rational faith of Christianity using facts, logic, history, science, philosophy, and reasoning. And it comes from 1 Peter 3:15, which says, always be prepared to give an apologia to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. Now, what apologia means what? Defense or explanation. Okay, so I want to answer some of those common objections that you hear. Remember, we went through these common statements. Okay, 1, it's wrong to force your morality, and I'm not going to answer all of them, but I'm going to answer, pick some that we answer. It's wrong to force your morality on others. Okay, let's look, and then you can't legislate morality, and laws can't change hearts. And laws can't change hearts. Okay, so let's look at the first one. It's wrong to force your moral values on others, right? Now, we're going to do a whole class on this, but I'm going to introduce the topic. It's called a suicide statement. Okay, a suicide statement is not what you think it is. A suicide statement is a statement that kills itself the minute you say it, right? Let me give you an example of a suicide. We'll do, as I said, we'll do a whole class on this. I want you guys to be experts in detecting suicide statements. Okay, if somebody was to say, I can't speak a word in English, this is a suicide statement. Why? Because you're like, wait, didn't you say that in English? Right? That's a suicide statement. So the minute you say it, you kill it, right? Okay, so we call it a suicide statement because the minute you say the statement kills itself the moment it is said. Now, here's another one. And if you're going to college, you're going to have a professor say this in philosophy class, which is kind of silly. He'll say, there is no truth. What is it? How do you answer this? What do you say? Is that true? Because if that's true, then there is a truth, at least one truth, and there's one truth, there are probably other truths. Or if that's not true, why are you lying to me, professor? And then you say, is this going to be on the test? And he says, yes. Are you lying to me? Is that true? Right? So how about this? It's wrong to force your moral values on others. You see this? This is a suicide statement. Let me give you a story. I was working at Philips Semiconductor years ago as a consultant, and there was a technician guy that was just nobody liked him kind of thing, but he and I seemed to get along together, and I was working on something, and he was sitting there he was sitting there in the lab reading the newspaper. This is back when we had newspapers, right? And suddenly it shows up, says, it was Republicans were in the House, it says, Senate bans, it was the Born Alive Infant Protection Act. So that means if you're a baby born alive, you are forced as a doctor to try and save the baby, right? And he said, I hated how those Republicans are always forcing their moral values on others. And I'm working away. I said, oh, so you think forcing moral values on others is wrong? He said, yeah. I said, is that your moral value? And he has this look on his face. And he looks at me really confused. He goes, oh, what then is the answer? You see, the minute you say you shouldn't force moral values on others, that's a moral value that you have, and you're forcing it on me. Right? We'll do an entire evening on suicide statement. But basically, that is false, right? That's a false statement. Okay, let's look at the next one. You can't legislate morality. So this is a fun one. I was once having lunch with a friend of mine, and I had been talking about abortion. And he was supposedly a Christian, a smart guy, had like a PhD from Stanford, went to MIT. He and I had like 3 patents together. Really smart guy. And we're sitting, and I talked about abortion, and he said, okay, fine, you can try and prove abortion is wrong. He was supposedly a Christian, right? I think he is a Christian, but he just never thought through it. I don't know why. So we got lunch, and we're eating, and he says, so I go through this whole thing. I prove why abortion is actually killing a human being, right? And we get to the end of it. He says, well, Neil, we can't legislate morality. And I said, what? And I am like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, right? But I don't want to say that to him, so I go, oh. I said, okay, well, I'm confused. Can you show me one law that's not based on a moral value? And he goes, yeah. And he starts thinking, and I'm eating my it was a Thai restaurant, I remember clearly, and I'm eating my Thai curry, and it's taking him a while. So I said, well, how about thou shalt not kill? A law against murder. He goes, no, that's a moral value. I go, okay, never mind, and I keep eating. And I said, I know, how about the law against stealing? He goes, no, that's a moral value too. And then he says this, he says, you're not helping me. And it goes on, and I finally comes up with one, and he says, Mother's Day. I'm like, Mother's Day? That's the 4th commandment. Why would you be? He goes, yeah, but the day could be any day. I'm like, that's not the point. It's not like they're going to come and arrest you because you celebrated Mother's Day a day late or a day early. So then he finally says the tax laws. I goes, absolutely, that's not a moral value. It's a made-up value. But the point is that almost every law, and even the tax law, is somebody's moral value. The law that allows abortions is somebody's moral value. It's not mine, but it's somebody's moral value should say we should allow abortion. Or somebody's moral value should say, yeah, we should tax people and give money to the poor. It's not mine. I think the churches should be doing it. And we'll talk about that, right? So all laws are based on moral values. In fact, it's very hard to find a law that ever was not based on a moral value. And then, of course, we get the last one. Laws can't change hearts. I like this one. I actually had to think about this because I heard it a few times, and I thought, yeah, I guess I better deal with it. So I started thinking about it. And then in the paper, this was a long time ago, so most of you won't know who this is. But in the paper, this picture showed up one day. Or in the news. Do you know who that is? Some people got to know who that is. Who is it? Britney Spears. Yeah, the older generation knows who that is. Britney Spears was a big pop star back in about 2000s, right? And if you look at that picture, she's driving down the freeway. There's a bodyguard, and look who's on her lap. People went crazy. They said she should have her kids taken away from her. I got in a conversation with someone, and they're like, yeah, she needs to have her kids taken away from her. She is irresponsible. Somebody should call CPS. And I said, let me ask you a question. I said, how did your mom take you to the grocery store when you were 5? And he had this look on his face like, oh my goodness. I said, how did you go to your grandpa's house when you were 8? He goes, we had a station wagon. All the kids were in the back fighting. And you know how it is, like all the kids are in the back fighting, because this is before seatbelts, right? Seatbelts and car seats and everything. You know, they're like, oh, she should be in a child's car seat. Oh, it's terrible that she's there. And I didn't even need to explain the law to you, and you knew why I was wrong. And yet, your parents never had seatbelts, never had child seats. They were around. And your dad, you know, you'd be driving down to grandma's house, and the kids would be fighting in the back, and your dad would go, stop it, and he'd go, whack, whack, whack. And he'd always get that one kid that wasn't fighting, because he was the only kid that in reach. If that was you, I'm sorry. Now, does that mean your parents are these horrible, deadly, vicious, cruel parents, and they should have been given to child protective services? But see, that law had only existed for 10 years when I had this conversation. In 10 years, everybody thought that it was evil not to put a child in a car seat. The law had changed their hearts so efficiently and effectively. You see, people's moral attitudes change all the time. In fact, laws do change hearts. It may not change your heart, but it will sure change the hearts of your children and your children's children. I remember the first time I took Mary Catherine down, I think you were like 6 or 7, down to L.A. because I was preaching at a church down there, and we got on the Hertz rent-a-car bus. And you know the rent-a-car buses, there are no seat belts on it. And she was like, there are no seat belts on this, Dad. I said, yes. I said, you could stand. She goes, I can stand while the bus is moving? And she, a 6-year-old kid, she was like, never had that opportunity before. And she was like looking all over. She was so excited that she could stand, right? Grown up under the law. Right? Now she's like, yeah, Dad, when can I get my permit? So now the other kids have figured that out. They're like, oh, we're in a parking lot. We don't need a stupid seatbelt, right? You know. So, but laws change heart all the time. In fact, even universities, you know, for decades, esteemed universities like Harvard and Yale have been teaching coursework and giving out PhDs in the role of laws in achieving cultural transformation. They think laws change hearts. And that's why they're working so hard to change our laws. The law for abortion, the law on same-sex marriage, the law on transgenderism, all those things. They know that they change people's hearts, and they'll change the culture. So laws do change behavior, and they can change hearts. Okay, you know the answer to this because we've done this before. Why did God give us the laws? To protect us, right? We've seen this slide many times before, right? And the more that we obey those laws, follow the laws, the happier, healthier, and safer, mutually prosperous we'll all be. Okay, so every time we talk about an issue that violates God's laws, it's because there's a consequence to it. And a lot of them, remember I talked, people want to let people do things because they want to be loving and kind to them. And they say Christians are judgmental. Remember that whole thing? Well, Christians are always judgmental. Well, are Christians judgmental? Let me ask you this. If you had a friend who had a meth addict, was a meth addict, right? He did meth. Is it loving to accept his methamphetamine use or to ask him to stop? Is it loving to let him continue doing it? You see, if you love somebody, these are all pictures of meth addicts. In 1 year, you can see the effect, right? In 3 years. The reality question you have to ask yourself is, how much should you hate the person to not warn them of what they're getting into? And Christians need to learn the consequences of God's laws, of disobeying God's laws. In fact, that's what we should be doing a lot of. So when we go up to people, we're not judging them saying, you're stupid. You're saying, my dear friend, stop it, because this will lead to this. I want to wrap up with a couple of things. A few years ago, I was in an argument with an atheist, and he said, look, I don't need your stupid Bible for me to be good. I can be good without it. I'm not going to go around murdering or stealing. I said, yeah, maybe not murdering or stealing, but you'd be a slave owner. You'd be promoting the kidnapping of women and forcing them to marry. You'd think gladiatorial combat was okay. You'd think cruelty to animals was okay. You'd think abandoning babies in the wild was okay. He says, don't be stupid. I don't need your Bible to tell me all that. I said, yes, you did, because you see, until the Christians got involved in politics and changed those laws, all of society thought that these laws were good. We stopped infanticide, child marriage, temple prostitution, forced prostitution, child prostitution, go down that list. Every one of those were stopped because a Christian got involved in politics and changed the laws. And I said, you, my friend, Mr. Atheist, are borrowing moral capital. You think it's bad to have slavery, but there wasn't this atheist standing up and saying, this is against the moral laws of nothing to have slaves. It was a Christian saying this is against the moral laws of God. Every one of these you have adopted as your own law. And yet it wasn't until Christians said it was wrong. See, even atheists should want Christians making laws. Why? Because even atheists don't think slavery, child labor, child marriage, and bride kidnapping should be legal. There is an objective moral law. And you really want the Christians to be the one introducing you to it, because that's what we've been doing in the past. I'm going to close with a video. Oh, did we check the video? I guess I'm not closing with a video. Because I totally forgot I had a video. Yeah, we haven't checked the video. We haven't done it. Okay, so never mind. I won't close it again. But I will just say, let me close with this. If we don't have objective moral laws, society will start moving downwards. And worse, if we start changing our objective moral laws to relativistic cultural laws, society will change, and the children who grow up under these laws will assume that they're valid and will change their hearts. So it's very important that we understand objective morality, and it's very important how we see how it leads us to that. Next week, we're going to talk about the Euthyphro dilemma, because this is a very important point. And the Euthyphro dilemma basically says, is good good because God said it? In which case, could he have said rape was good, and would it be good? Could he have said anything was good, and it'd be good? And the answer is, I'm not asking the question. It's the rhetorical question. My daughter just learned the rhetorical question. Next week, we'll answer it. So, well, although you can do it, we can talk during the Q&A, except I'll avoid answering that. Is good good because God said it was good, in which case it's random. It's capricious. Capricious means just arbitrary. But if you say, no, good is good, and then somebody will say, then the atheist will say, well, in that case, is God lesser than good? Is good something that God has to obey? In which case, why isn't God subject to goodness? And then why do you need God if good is independent of God? See that? So is good created by God artificially, or is good something that God is a slave to himself? In which case, why do you need God to be good? It's already there. So if objective moral values already exist and God is subject to objective moral values, then why do I need God? Right? Okay, so we'll talk about that next week. And with that, any questions? What time is it? 8, 8, 8:30. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes, 15, 11 minutes. Any questions? Yes.
Begin by saying something. Um,
Yeah, it is on. We can hear you.
it is. It is? Okay. I just wanted to start with a statement that I felt was related. I was listening to Jordan Peterson talking to a lady who had escaped from North Korea, and the question is, why don't the North Korean citizens rise up against their evil dictators and all the death, because they're all suffering horrendously? The reason is because the laws have been there for so long, they don't know that they're enslaved. They don't know what freedom is. They think this is normal. So it just goes to show that when a law is in place for so long, it's your kids who will grow up thinking this is normal, this is okay.
Yeah.
And it's not until someone says, hey, this is wrong, you're in slavery, you're not supposed to be dying on the streets, you're not supposed to be working
Right.
at a young age for a government when you don't receive any of the benefits.
That's
So
a good point, yeah. In fact, when I first came to the States, I remember sitting down talking to somebody, and they said, you know, there used to be no income tax in the U.S. I'm like, what? She said, yeah, there used to be no income tax in it. Well, how do they survive? She says, you don't need an income tax for the country to survive. I said, well, wait, when? And I started doing research. We didn't have an income tax before 1913. And the country had the biggest growth until the 1913s, and that's when the brakes were slammed on us. At some point, we're going to have we're going to have a speaker from the IRS do a short thing in a couple of months. I've invited him to speak with Trevor Loudon, before Trevor Loudon. So if you want, you should come to the VAC. Make sure you're signed. You'll get, if you're on our list, you'll get the thing for the VAC, which will lead us to a quick announcement before we go to the next question. Yes.
I'd like to invite you all to pick up a flyer from us. We have flyers. Actually, I'll pass them around, or we'll get MK2. We have a guest coming on April 9th. His name is Pastor Jim Doman. I wanted to say Tim. Jim Doman. He calls himself a former gay, not an ex-gay. He says former because in Corinthians, the former things have passed away, and he's become a new creature in Christ. So he's a father, a pastor, and he's coming to share. He also has written a book, and I think you'll all enjoy.
It's called.
Wait, yeah, those are the ones. And the book.
What's the name of the book? It's right there.
He's not a mistake. Not a mistake.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've got other really exciting things coming, so we have a calendar for you. We've got Curtis Bowers. If any of you follow his weekend podcasts, weekly podcasts, he's coming. Trevor Loudon is coming on Saturday night, and then he'll be here again on Sunday to show a movie with Q&A time. This is home education for your kids. You should be bringing them to every VAC meeting. They're very good. They're held at Calvary.
Oh,
And
if
the way
you're,
you
if
sign
you're on,
up to be
if
on
you're
the-
on our mailing list, are you getting my emails? Okay, so go to
VAC.org or mobile.
VAC.org or signup.vacmail.org. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's make sure you're getting on the list.
Be
yeah.
sure to get on the mailing list at VAC.org and bring your friends, bring your students, your kids. Really,
It's always a
you'll
great time.
benefit. And it's usually free, but there will be some.
There's some down the line that may not be.
We've got
depending
a
on the
really
guests.
exciting event on July 2nd, and it's going to be called a Liberty Fest, and we're patterning it after Charlie Kirk's event in Phoenix, Arizona that was called America Fest, and we're going to have a really,
And
really
we're
great
working with
lineup
TP
of
Faith.
speakers.
So
Yes.
is it TP Faith or PTUS?
It's
TP USA
TP
Faith.
It's TP USA Faith is
Okay.
the way we ended up. But anyway, be watching for that and pray for us because we have a lot of controversial, exciting speakers.
Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, you can watch it online. Yeah. Except you have to go to Rumble because they kicked us off YouTube. Yeah. But if you sign up, if you're on the mailing list, you'll get it. You should be getting it and all. Yeah. Any other questions? No. This was a heavy
going
topic.
once, twice.
Okay. Yeah, right here.
My son is asking about what verse in the Bible shows that we are a free agent, as you were talking about a few weeks ago, and so
Free moral agent.
free moral agent, yeah. Is that just the choice given to Adam and Eve?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I don't have it at my fingertips, but I can look it up for you. I don't know the verse off, but there are a number of verses that, where it says, choose rightly, choose life, choose justice. So all the implications that we get the right to choose. Now there is a question between the Reform view and the semi-Pelagian view of, do we get to choose salvation, or does God appoint us to salvation? But besides all that, we are free agents when it comes to daily moral choices. So you can argue about the salvation part of things, but we definitely have free will between our moral choices. So depending on which side, if you're a Calvinist / Reform, you'll say no, God appoints you. If you're Arminian, or there are no Arminians, hopefully, but semi-Pelagian, meaning you believe in a free will, then you actually choose salvation, and that's a big, fun argument between brothers. But but everything in there implies that you as an individual have a choice to make daily moral choices. Yeah, if you send me an email, I'll dig them out. But if you just look up all the verses that say choose life or choose wisely, and a lot of in the Proverbs, choose, my son, pick, Yes, right here. Oh, hang on, Steve.
In John 1:12, it says, "And yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." So that would be one of those. It doesn't outright say choose, but
Yeah.
You're receiving him, you're believing in his
Although
name.
that tends to be more of a Reform verse, because
Yeah.
it's all what are pointed. Yeah.
But
yeah,
you
yeah.
were saying
yeah,
that you can,
yeah. But
different-
a lot of these things have the
Yeah.
choice. Death. The one I think of is entrapment is lurking at your door. All those, right? So.
How would you respond to someone who may not respond when you say that there's objective morals because of say the one illustration that you gave of torturing babies for fun?
Yeah.
What if someone were to say, well, I just believe that's a universal truth, not necessarily an objective truth?
I
Or
would
is
not
that
know.
just
I don't know what the
semantics, or
difference
is-
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
If everybody believes it.
Yeah, for
Now-
some reason that just popped into
Yeah,
my
yeah,
mind
I
while
know.
you were talking.
I
was
mean,
like,
I guess you could try to argue that it doesn't make it objective; it just makes it that everybody believes it.
yeah,
But my definition of objective is everybody believes it, right?
yeah,
So, but in the end, my proof for objective morality is really based on the fact that I prove that God exists first.
yeah.
And then I come to it. I don't try to go. I try to catch people by going this way, but
Yeah,
it's a lot easier to come down the line and go, yeah, the whole who's agent X argument, God exists using science. Now we come down this way. And then the argument I like to say is, look, maybe one argument doesn't solve the problem for you, but when I hit 10 arguments right after each other, right? Like one of the things I say in the book, Who's Agent X, I said, the Big Bang is only one of the Big Bangs. The Big Bang of the universe is one of the Big Bangs. You have to still answer, where did the Big Bang of consciousness come from? Where did the Big Bang of language come from? Where did the Big Bang of life come from? Life didn't just, so the whole bunch of Big Bangs, where did the Big Bang of this universal morality come from, right? So there, I'm like, you've got a whole bunch of explaining to do, right,
exactly.
Lucy, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way I come down from. But yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, somebody may ask that. So.
All right.
Any others? Okay. See you guys next week. We will be here next week. We will do part 2 of this. Great. Thanks.